This is Leo Babeu for KTWH, and I have on the phone with us today Paula Maccabee. Paula is the Advocacy Director and Counsel for WaterLegacy, a nonprofit working on several key water protection issues across Minnesota. Good morning, Paula. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Leo. Lovely to be here.
Paula, could you share with us a little bit about the mission and some of the critical work of WaterLegacy? A number of people may have heard that you're doing a lot of activism and litigation these days, but exactly what is the focus of your work of late, and what are you responsible for at the nonprofit?
Well, thank you, Leo. WaterLegacy was founded in 2009, primarily by activists who live and work in northeastern Minnesota. And our mission is to protect Minnesota's clean waters and the communities, both human and animal, that depend on them. And much of our work has focused on northeastern Minnesota. We started out with the idea that copper-nickel mining or sulfide mining was just too dangerous, too risky for the water-rich area of northeastern Minnesota. And what we thought would happen with our advocacy is that the regulators would figure that out for themselves, because I had always been taught that Minnesota was a state with very tough regulations and very good regulators. And what the past, now it's 12 years working with WaterLegacy, has taught me, to my shock and surprise, is that Minnesota regulations may look good on the books, but in operation, they are just plain not enforced. And now when WaterLegacy and tribes are working together with other environmental groups, and we're winning in court, and we're starting to get the courts to say, and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency to say, you have to enforce your laws, the first response of our state is to try and get rid of them. So our concern is that Minnesota has to remain a state that protects our most important and valuable resource, which is fresh, clean water. And that's important not only for our economy and our recreation, but for our health and the very survival of the plants and animals that make up our natural community in Minnesota.
We arranged to speak today not to talk about the newer form of mining that's never been conducted in Minnesota, sulfide mining for copper-nickel, but an issue came up that I was made aware of that you are also dealing with, and that is a proposed change to the operations of the massive tailings basin that is up at what's called Milepost 7 in the Beaver River Valley. It is the place where the tailings from the processing of taconite is deposited behind large earthen dams, and many people who are younger or new to the area might not understand that there was a milestone case in the early 1970s. Legal and regulatory actions had to be pursued. One of the earliest major environmental cases in the U.S. where the then reserve mining was dumping huge quantities of tailings into Lake Superior at their Silver Bay facility. We now know that it dramatically altered habitat for a number of the fish of Lake Superior, but issues came to the head because there were asbestos fibers in those tailings that made their way all the way to the Duluth city drinking water and probably other drinking water supplies. And Milepost 7 was, I will say, for want of a better word, the resolution that was arrived at that was deemed tenable and put in the, I don't know when the actual filling of the basin began, but the preparation and the environmental review all happened between 75 and 1980, and maybe you know a little bit more about exactly when operations began there, Paula, but could you provide us with a kind of overview of what's proposed to change at that big operation up the shore from us?
Sure. I mean, I think people need to realize that tailings disposal is a very risky proposition. And back in the 1970s, when Reserve was dumping tailings in Lake Superior, the Minnesota, basically through pressure from the courts as well as from the community, said, well, we're going to have to find an on-land disposal area for the tailings. And Minnesota, the agencies, the Pollution Control Agency and the Department of Natural Resources, they studied the possibility of putting tailings at what's now called Milepost 7 right up there in Silver Bay. And they concluded that it was too dangerous, actually, to have tailings 600 feet above Lake Superior and only 3 miles away from Lake Superior the way that it is now. And the company basically said, if we have to put it someplace else and it costs us any more money, we're going to just go bankrupt and keep pouring tailings into Lake Superior. And so there were cases in the courts, and what the courts initially said is, it finally said at the Supreme Court is, listen, DNR, you have to stick this tailings basin next to Lake Superior, next to the community of Silver Bay. And the state did a study, and then the Army Corps did a study, and they concluded that if they put some limits on it, it would only be 40 years worth of project, and it would be the kind of dam that's really pretty safe, which is called a downstream dam, where the dam is built on the solid ground. It doesn't rest upon the loose tailings. It's built on the solid ground. That they would take that risk. The agency said we need to take that risk so we can at least get them to stop dumping in Lake Superior. Now, that was way back in 1977. Since then, there's been no study. I mean, if you think about it, there's been no review to look at how things are going there, what's the current state of the art of making tailings basins and tailings dams. And as a member of the public, we never heard anything about any of the changes the Department of Natural Resources has allowed being made in that tailings basin since 1977. But last year, the Army Corps gave a notice that North Shore Mining, which is now the third in a series of owners, Cleveland Cliff, who owns that tailings basin, was planning to expand it by 844 acres. And several of us, a couple of our lead volunteers in the community said, well, aren't they going to study it? And WaterLegacy wrote a long letter with a lot of exhibits saying, please, before you expand this tailings basin right above people's homes, right above Lake Superior, can't you just do a study so you use the best technology? And what we just learned on June 28th is DNR's answer was a resounding no. No environmental review, no public comment process, no review of what's the safest and best way to store tailings now. And WaterLegacy is concerned not only because we have supporters who live in that area, but because we've been trying it not only for copper-nickel mining, but for existing mines to have Minnesota's practices be brought up to date. And once again, the agencies are saying, no matter what's changed, no matter what the risk is to water and to humans, if it's not something the mining company volunteers to do, we're not going to make them do it.
Folks might want to know that when you got wind of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineer filing for that, and what is the terminology used? Because it seems that even words are open to selective definition in some of the interplay between the agency and groups like WaterLegacy. They're insisting it's not an expansion. And so you got wind of the U.S. Army Corps saying that this project was going to happen where the basin would be expanded, and you submitted detailed comments. I think it was a 22-page memo or letter, or I don't know the proper way you term that legally, but it seemed like a very serious, informed inquiry for them to respond to the points you were making about why there was a need to do a new environmental review because of the length of time and the nature of the massive expansion of what was envisioned 40 years ago. And then it took 9 months, and then as of last week, I have been able to read a 68-page response, I guess, but I guess it's an internal memo. Maybe you could help people know what the DNR generated last week, in which they cite WaterLegacy's comments and almost try to do a point-by-point rebuttal.
There is no disagreement that the tailings basin is going to get a lot bigger.
Right.
The Department of Natural Resources does not even use a number. The Department of Natural Resources says that they've been allowing the tailings basin to fill in more than the Army Corps thought, and they say it's going to get 650 acres bigger. The Army Corps says it's going to get 845 acres bigger. But They both agree the tailings basin is going to get bigger. The DNR says, that's the Department of Natural Resources, that there are going to be 12,000 more feet of dam in terms of the length of dams.
Right.
Both the federal and the state agencies agree they're going to tear down a railroad and build a new one.
Yes.
And so in terms of everybody agree, and in addition, DNR says they're going to fill in or impact more than 8,000 feet of stream. So everybody agrees it's going to get bigger. We don't what the Department of Natural Resources says, which is different from WaterLegacy, is the Department of Natural Resources says we don't have to look at the final EIS, which is Environmental Impact Statement, done by the Army Corps once the project was actually going to be located at Milepost 7. We just have to look at an earlier state environmental review, even though that environmental review said that the project was so risky that it would not comply with law and the tailings had to be someplace else. So there is no doubt in anyone's mind that this tailings basin is going to get bigger. It's going to expand. The only question is, does that require anybody other than the DNR sitting in the little conference room with the door closed and the mining company to take a look at it? And WaterLegacy's position is the public needs and has the right to know. The public has the right to know how much bigger it's going to get, what kind of wetlands are going to be destroyed, and probably most important is the way that DNR has been allowing North Shore Mining to build those dams for the tailings. Is that safe? Is that safe for people downstream? And is it safe for the water quality of Lake Superior, which affects everybody in the region up and down that North Shore?
Yes. Paula, if I might, I just wanted to remind folks we're speaking with Paula Maccabee, Advocacy Director and Lead Counsel for the nonprofit WaterLegacy, about the Milepost 7 Tailings Basin Expansion. And it occurs to me, Paula, I know you've had great reason in your mind to take issue with how the DNR has been handling this. In a way, is there any chance that there's a simpler check and balance that the Army Corps, being a federal agency and with the National Environmental Policy Act and the Clean Water Act provisions like Section 404, which is all about putting dredge and tailings into waterways, will they perhaps have a much greater say in the end? Is it just that simple, or has the DNR been subverting that process in your mind somehow? How would they get around that?
Well, there are two checks and balances available. There's one check and balance, which is when the DNR makes a decision, WaterLegacy or another advocacy group, human beings can go to court.
Yeah.
So there's one check and balance, which is the court system. The federal government, the Army Corps, has only a partial check and balance here because the Army Corps has authority having to do with destruction of wetlands and streams.
Yes.
The Army Corps, though, is not likely to tell DNR what to do about dam construction. What's so important for people to realize is in 1977, there was a compromise, and the Army Corps actually says that in its environmental impact statement, that the disposal sites would only be used for 40 years, and that there would be some adverse effects, but the benefits to society would be the cessation of disposal of taconite tailings in Lake Superior. And to try and make that okay for the people of Silver Bay and the people who live on and near Lake Superior, what the Army Corps was very clear, and actually even the Department of Natural Resources was very clear, they had to use downstream dam, which at that time was the best and safest method. Since then, the Department of Natural Resources has allowed the mining companies to use upstream dams. Those are the kinds of dams that collapsed in Brazil, and a dam that started out downstream and then had upstream lifts on top of it. That's what collapsed at Mount Poly. So the concern from WaterLegacy's perspective and our many supporters who live in the North Shore region is not only whether we're going to have a tailings basin, but whether the Department of Natural Resources is hiding from the public in order to use yesterday's cheapest technology rather than doing the best possible job to protect Lake Superior and to protect the people in the community who rely not only on the safety, but rely on having clean water.
Could I interject a thought?
Sure.
That in what I perused in the 68 pages from the DNR that you shared with me was kind of a disconnect. I wasn't even sure that even the ultimate dam height was in accord with what you had been told through the U.S. Army Corps notice. They were talking about 1,315 feet, and the other documents were 1,365 feet. A difference of 50 feet is an enormous amount of potential hydraulic head increase for the final project, and that has a lot to do with the risk of the impact of water seeping, because these tailing dams, earthen dams, typically let water pass through their footings, and that's where some of the issues arise.
Right. And what has come out in this final decision, and I don't know whether it's the result of any of the advocacy that people did, including WaterLegacy. Right now, DNR is not proposing to allow an increase in height beyond 1,315 feet.
Okay.
It should be pointed out, though, that there would be a greater area at that height, and also that the current dam is not that tall.
Right.
And part of it, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm really uncomfortable, Leo, with looking at it and saying it's 2021. We're going to rely on what was expected in 1976 or 1977 without taking a hard look at what we know today. What we know is that taking some of the water out of tailings before you store them is safe. Putting a liner underneath is safer. Building downstream dams rather than upstream dams is safer. Not having a dam near an ash landfill is safer. So we have all these things that we know in 2021 are safer than what the Department of Natural Resources is proposing to allow without even doing an environmental review, without hearing any comments from people in the community. And so we don't believe that the DNR should be keeping this secret from people. There should be an open and environmentally sound process to make sure that if there have to be tailings stored in the Milepost 7, that Minnesota is doing it according to the best science and best technology today, and doing it with information shared and transparency to the public.
It does bring up the question, because there's a lot of reference in the DNR memo that there is no, even though it's obvious that there has been upstream dam method of construction happen on this project, they're now saying in this 68-page memo that this would all be something they're calling a modified centerline technology. It brings up the entire question of whether the DNR of Minnesota is really a fully constituted dam engineering review board. Really, is that its charge? Does it have the capacity to do such a thing? And did it share documentation of the Cleveland Cliffs supplied documents that would show what is planned for the extension and the building up of these dams?
You know, Leo, I think this is exactly why environmental review is necessary. I mean, what you read in the 68-page document is a long time ago, without letting anyone in the public know. DNR allowed First Reserve and then its successors to move away from downstream dams just because it was cheaper. It was easier to get the material because you don't have to use as much material to build an upstream dam. Now, whether the actual upstream dams would be safe, Mount Poly initially started with a downstream dam, and then they built these upstream centerline higher levels. So I think we would need to have an open process, and independent engineers look at, is what DNR proposing to allow safe? Are the factors of safety high enough? Is the construction the right kind? Are they taking unnecessary risks by not dewatering the tailings? All of these, if you look back in the last 10 years, with collapse after collapse of upstream dams, there is a deep professional literature about these risks that even in 1975, no one wanted to take a risk of an upstream dam this close to Lake Superior. So why are they doing it now? Cleveland Cliffs is not going broke. The taconite industry is not on the ropes. This is the time to study it, to get the best available technology, and protect the people and protect the water.
Fair enough. I just thought I would bring up the point that I'm sure Cleveland Cliffs wouldn't find it in their interest to have a dam failure either, and a lot of people probably would suggest they have to know what they're doing. This is what they do as a business. I'm not sure how many tailings basins they do manage, and this is an extraordinary situation to be talking about 600-700 feet above the largest freshwater body in the world, and with a breach, meaning that a wall of water and millions of tons of complicated tailings sludge would be flowing down a river valley into the lake at 20 miles an hour, probably arriving in less than 10 minutes. It's not a scenario anyone would imagine happening along the North Shore of Lake Superior, and yet what you're saying is that we're not getting enough due diligence to find out whether we're doing the best job of avoiding that.
Absolutely. And for example, Leo, it is clear, it was admitted that even just 1,000 feet of dam breach would mean that the tailings would be deposited into Lake Superior with no opportunity for recapture. And the last time that there was actually a number of people, and that was way back in 1976, and they said there would be 8 residences affected. There is not even one shred of data anywhere in this record saying how many people would be affected now.
Right.
How many workers? How many homes? And the idea that we would have an expansion of a tailings dam without that information is very troubling. But I think the other thing you asked about, Cleveland Cliffs, like any other corporation, has a fiduciary obligation to pay attention to the cost to shareholders. And that's a short-term cost. The risk of having that tailings dam right above Lake Superior is perpetual. It won't stop even if Cleveland Cliffs is no longer in business, even if they're no longer mining, even if the operation shuts down. So when you're building something that has that kind of a risk of a wall of slurry tailings moving towards Lake Superior and poisoning that enormously important water resource, it's just that we need to do it right. And what's supposed to happen? Our government is supposed to stand up for the people and stand up for the clean water and make sure that it's not only the greatest profit and the shortest time, but that the government is allowing the public to be protected going in the future. And that's the missing piece here.
Paula, it's hard for me to know from our exchanges thus far where we really are in the scheme of things regarding this project, because if it doesn't undergo environmental review, I don't really know how many more hurdles there are or how many places there are in the process where public input might be relevant. Could you just give us an idea of what we can realistically achieve through citizen input regarding getting honest scrutiny of environmental and health concerns?
I think that there are two different things, Leo. In terms of a public comment period, the public comment period for the Army Corps is long gone, and the DNR simply shut down the idea of having a public comment period. I think it's important for people to call the governor or contact the governor and say, we are not saying we don't want taconite mining. We're saying we want mining and safety and clean water. And a process that shuts out the entire community doesn't do it. But in terms of making a change, I think this is a long-term pressure that needs to be placed on the legislative leaders all along the North Shore and throughout Minnesota. And for right now, what I'd say is call the governor. And we're looking into whether there's some legal action that would be appropriate. I don't have the answer to that question yet.
Well, we will try to stay tuned for that for sure. Paula, it sounds like you referenced the fiduciary responsibility of the Cleveland Cliffs Corporation to its shareholders, and you would think that there need to be players in this game who are elected representatives in addition to our executive branches, the agencies, but we need to have leaders who see their fiduciary role in safeguarding the health, welfare, and well-being of the population of the state, and in particular where various projects that have real risk might be cited.
That's exactly right, Leo. We need legislators as well as the governor who will say that their responsibility is to protect people and protect water, not just to protect the short-term jobs or the short-term profits, because in order for Minnesota to succeed long-term, we have to have that regulatory break, that regulatory leverage so that the public interest is protected.
I just ponder the future knowing that of late it seems like litigation, bringing it to the third branch of government, seemed to be the only way to kind of get more attention for the concerns of those who know that there might be a shortchanging of the assessment of what the cost benefits of these projects are. Is that where we're headed, where this is just going to be a litigious way to go? Is that sustainable for us to be able to have a balanced economy and healthy environment and healthy public?
I think you're making a really good point, Leo. Litigation is only a piece of the puzzle. our system will only work to protect jobs and clean water if people get active and engaged in their local politics, not just coming out every 4 years to vote for a governor, but paying attention to what their elected officials in the townships and the counties and at the state legislature are doing, and tell them that we don't want businesses and industry at the expense of clean water. We want both. And in order to have both mining jobs and safety and clean water, the Department of Natural Resources has to allow environmental review and has to make the process open to the public and open to independent experts. And the way we're doing it now is far too risky for communities and far too risky for our long-term clean water.
I sure hope that everyone, regardless of whether they're working for the corporation whose activity we've been talking about, which is a really major player in the economy of this small rural county, Lake County, that everybody really has to be taking a look at our well-being 5, 10, 30 years from now and not thinking that it just simply is a matter of whether the jobs are there tomorrow, but what the larger scale say is the cost-benefit of maintaining the path we're on.
Absolutely. And that's what government is for, Leo. I mean, even a good corporation, and this is not to slam Cleveland Cliffs, if their job is to propose what they want to do, it is the government's job to make sure that what they do also meets the long-term needs of the community for clean water and for safety and for protecting one of the most magnificent bodies of water that Minnesota was lucky enough to be next to Lake Superior.
Paula, we will hopefully be able to follow this issue, and maybe as things unfold, we'll be able to talk to you to see where the process may change. And I will welcome you back if we have some new facts to talk about, and I really do appreciate your time and your efforts and your explanations today.
Thank you so much, Leo, and I appreciate your concern for your community and your obvious in-depth knowledge of this issue. And I'm glad that you're going to help other people become informed so that they can begin to protect their own lives and those of their neighbors and the wonderful water they live near.
Well, thank you, Paula, for joining us today. We've been speaking with Paula Maccabee, Advocacy Director and Counsel for WaterLegacy. Thanks a lot, Paula. We'll see you down the road, we hope.
Thank you, Leo. Take care.
Bye now. We've been speaking with Paula Maccabee about the Milepost 7 expansion project up along the North Shore, 3 miles from Silver Bay. You're in tune to KTWH, LP 99.5 FM, ktwh.org online.